Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I wanted to do a video on what happens after you break away and you leave your house and you're sort of freed from the constraints of living in an environment with narcissists, and sort of what happens when you're essentially on your own for the first time. I know for me that when I finally got out of my parents' house, I was 19 going on 20. And it's a really confusing experience growing up in that environment. But then one of the most frustrating and ultimately one of the most debilitating things is that after you get out, you have no idea who you are. Most young people already struggle with, sort of forming an identity. It's more about, trying different things and wearing many different hats. In my case, I have a story related to this that is directly related to actually wearing hats. So when I was a kid, I had a beanie, not unlike the one that I'm wearing right now. And it was an Alice in Chains beanie. And this would have been around 1994, 95, 96. My dad forbade me to wear the hat because in his mind it was a gangster hat. My dad is an incredibly racist person, but he is a subtype of narcissist, what is known as an easy moralizer. If you read Robert Greene's book, The Laws of Human Nature, he does a really good breakdown and sort of general overview of the different subtypes of narcissists. And my dad falls into this easy moralizer category. And effectively what that is a person that cannot see the world in terms of a shade of gray. Everything is either black or white, good or bad. And for him, he had this very stringent worldview about, especially as it pertains to things like music and art, aspects of culture, a lot of judging going on. And if you don't agree with that person's judgments, which are changing all the time, then you become the bad object, or you become associated with their fragile sense of self, which is shifting and changing all the time. My father had 15 cars, different cars, growing up. He would buy a new car every 2 or 3 years. And that would coincide with this new personality that he had developed for himself. So he went through a religious phase. He went through a country music cowboy phase. He got a pickup truck. He went through this like green energy progressive phase that was quickly or preceded by driving an incredibly large SUV called an Excursion back in 99, 2000. So why do I talk about this? Because when you're raised by a person that has that limited perspective, that fragile of a sense of self, you cast out into the world, and it's hard enough to figure out who you are as a kid, as a teenager, as a young adult. When you're raised by a narcissist who has absolutely no conception of a self, which is changing all the time, and a mother who won't defend you or stick up for you, you have no foundation. And whatever foundation you were trying to build as a kid, that person keeps on destroying. So, like, if you encounter a spider and you destroy their web, like you take it, you untangle it, or you move it, that spider is going to continually spool a new web. You know, it's not upset. It's just operating on instinct. And as a kid, you're kind of doing the same thing. You get so conditioned to, you're trying to build something, you're trying to construct a reality, and then this person comes by and they knock it down. I used to refer to it with my friend Gabi as playing Jenga, because in addition to the narcissist abuse, I was bipolar, or I am bipolar, I should say. I still am, which I inherited from my mother. And it's like you're constantly constructing yourself, and you're building this self, but there's no foundation to build on. So what you have is this wobbling tower of a self, this house of cards foundation, and it's just a matter of time before it collapses, and your sense of self is constantly being challenged. And because you don't have any foundation to build on, a gust of wind can come by, someone can make a comment, someone can say something, and it completely erodes you. You don't really have a concept of who you are, because you're completely and totally emotionally dysregulated. And you can't really construct a personality or a persona when you don't have any idea what it is that you are or what it is that you like. Now, in some ways, I had a very exaggerated sense of self. I had to fight tooth and nail just to be able to explore the things I wanted to explore, the writers that I was interested in, the music that I was interested in, the world that I was interested in, the films that I liked. But so much of my identity, I felt, was not able to find a voice. And I was so grateful that anyone would kind of accept me and embrace my friendship, that I never felt like I could meet the people that were interested in the things I was interested in, because I was just constantly questioning my deepest authentic self. And when you're in that environment, you're like a ghost. You it's like you're not even a person. And one of the hardest things is trying to understand where your personality begins and where another person's personality ends, because you have no concept of boundaries. When you grow up with boundaryless parents who basically instill in you, who you are is who I tell you you are, they're not guiding you. They're not directing you. They're drawing you, almost like you're a concept something illusory. You're not even given the dignity or the self-respect of someone who can think or behave independently. And if you try to, you are corrected until you stop. They try to break you like a stallion, like a racing horse, until you just give up. And the end result is, no matter what you do or what you accomplish, it feels like you're constantly having to start over again. And even if it isn't true, and the net effect is one of constantly feeling like you're not enough as you are, unless you're appealing to or in the service of what someone else is either interested in or sees value in. All the measure of your worth is determined by some sort of external source outside of yourself. And inside is this agonizing, bottomless well of emptiness that you try to fulfill or fill with external validation and things outside of yourself, because you've been trained to see yourself as undeserving of love and respect, and conditioned to receive abuse and bad treatment. The other part of this that is really difficult or challenging is this idea of basically not being able to draw a line between romantic love and physical intimacy, unable to separate those things because you've never been shown love, real love, how to express it, how to receive it, how to treat another person that isn't based in some sort of power dynamic or this feeling that they're going to leave you or abandon you. And the net effect is you constantly feel like there's danger lurking around every corner and that people cannot be trusted, and that the only use that you have as an individual is what you can do for someone else. And it's a fucking lonely feeling. And it sucks. And, you know, a lot of people will say things like, aren't you a little too old to still be angry at your parents? Or that writer who wrote The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, who says, you know, actually, the things that your parents did don't really affect you as much as you think they did, and you can learn to get over this. It's true. It's absolutely true. You can do work on yourself and get over it. Kind of. But in order for that work to begin, you need to know what has been done to you. And it's kind of like Plato's allegory of the cave, or waking up from a cult, or breaking out of some sort of religious indoctrination. The cult of narcissism is entrenched in your mind. And it's like a narcotic, it's like a drug. You're living in this hallucination that has been engineered by this emotionally immature adult, or in my case, emotionally immature adults. And it's a mask that they've pulled over your eyes. And yeah, I mean, as cliched as it sounds, it's like living in the goddamn Matrix. You're living in this delusional dream world that this other person who didn't raise you, failed at the one job that they had as a parent, which was to protect you. And instead of raising you, they do the opposite, which is they want to keep you in a state of regression and infantilize you as a way of propping up this fake egotistical front that they've engineered for themselves in order to prop up this fallacious ego construction of themselves. And it's really painful because you just don't know who you are. And at 38 years old, I've done things in my life that I'm proud of. But none of it really matters to me, if I'm being honest. There's this undercurrent of nihilism that you try to escape from, that you want to find meaning in, that you would like to be able to love and care for other people and for yourself. But there's this nagging sense, this internal saboteur, this internal critic that is constantly telling you that you're a fool, you're a fraud. And a lot of people struggle with that regardless of whether they grew up in an environment like that. But when you grow up in an environment like this, with two totally fucked, emotionally dysregulated parents, you don't have a baseline of normal, because at least in my case, everyone in my family was screwed up emotionally and reeling from intergenerational trauma. So my uncles, my aunts, they were all dangerous, unsafe people. But how can you know that until you actually break away from it? You can't. And by the time you start trying to work on yourself, which for me started when I was 16 years old. I told my parents that I wanted to go to therapy. I think maybe actually earlier. I think it was junior high. But the problem is most therapists then, and especially now, they don't understand narcissism. They don't understand what you're being subjected to. So all of their advice was actually completely destructive. That's not to disparage therapists. They're trying to do their best, but we're going through this reckoning right now with traditional therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, because it does not address the root cause of the trauma. In fact, it's largely ignoring it, and it's just trimming the weeds. I got advice from some therapists, things like, you should write your parents a letter And this is just harmful, self-destructive, and counterproductive. Now, the other side of this is when you grow up and this is your map of meaning, you're trying to circumnavigate reality, but the map of the terrain is all wrong. So could you imagine, for example, using Google Maps on your phone, and you're trying to drive from one city to another. And rather than taking you where you need to go, the phone decides to run you off the road into a ravine or take you through a bunch of thorn bushes or taking you into the woods in all these irrational circles or taking 4 right turns at times. It makes getting to your destination that much more challenging. Now, what it does is it behooves you to try and find and construct your own map. But it's hard when you've been given such bad programming. Deprogramming and debugging these poor strategies. You've raised yourself, but in addition to raising yourself, you have to try and undo the damage that these people have wrought on yourself, on your psyche. And it's just a very challenging thing. So here I am. I'm 38 now, and I find myself, I'm living in my friend's house right now that he's been kind enough to let me live in. A friend of mine that I've known since kindergarten, basically fictive brother. And I recently got out of a 7-year relationship with someone who also has unhealed trauma. I foolishly lost a lot of money in some bad investments, which is the case when you're in a manic state, which I was. And I'm not a victim. These are decisions that I made, and I'm an adult. But it's hard. It's hard to accept responsibility for yourself when you don't have anyone to fall back on. You have no one that you can go to for advice. You have no people in your life that have ever cared about you. And you have no concept of love. And the last part is not true. I had a grandmother, but she died about 2 months ago. 3 months ago. And now that she's gone, the only person who showed you a modicum of what it means to love someone unconditionally, I find myself adrift. And I have no I feel like I have no executive function or ability to construct a future for myself. And I feel like I never have. I've done things in my life that I'm proud of. I feel like I was a pretty good teacher at times. I taught a huge age range of different students. I was in 3 or 4 bands. I lived abroad in Vietnam for 7 years. At one point, I threw a music festival. I've played on stage in front of over 500 people once. But it's almost like I can't even feel the strength or the sense of accomplishment that person was capable of doing these things. And the whole time I was abroad, I would send my parents footage of me teaching or tell them about the things that I was involved with, and they would just ignore it. They would just pretend like it didn't matter or change the subject. It's like you're not even there. It's like something Mark Maron says. It's like you're an appendage. And it's just such a shitty feeling. You were raised by ghosts. And it's fucking hard. And right now, all my worldly possessions are in Mexico City, because my partner and we fled China after COVID. I was in China during COVID. And COVID raked our relationship over hot coals. And for 2 years, we fought to get out of the city, or out of the country. We were trying to go back to Vietnam. And we couldn't do it. I hadn't spoken to my parents in 3 years. Because before I left Vietnam with my partner for Japan, my dad called me up on the phone, drunk. And he accused me of having stolen $10,000 from him and my mother, which is not true. And he told me that I needed to pay it back right away. I did some freelance work for a tech company. Well, I was based in Vietnam, and they would deposit that money into a bank account in the States that my mother had control of in case of an emergency. I know. Bad idea, right? Well, 2 weeks before I was supposed to go to my partner and I were moving to Japan, my dad drained my entire bank account. He took my life savings. And I'm pretty fucking convinced that my mother left out a check that arrived in the mail to their house so he could find it I didn't speak to them for 3 years, and for 3 years I would get these emails talking about how resentment is an anger. It's drinking poison and expecting the other person to get hurt. And it really boils the blood. That a person could be that emotionally cruel and then have the audacity to place blame on the other person or accuse them of being the aggressor.